What if I told you that your daily routine, the one you consider completely normal, the one that everyone around you also has, is actually one of the biggest obstacles standing between you and the financial life you truly deserve? I'm not talking about obvious vices. I'm not talking about clearly wrong decisions. I'm talking about habits that seem absolutely harmless, that even seem intelligent, practical, and modern, but that underneath are consuming your income in a way you've probably never stopped to truly calculate. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're going to discover here is not about earning more money. It's not about a secret formula for getting rich. It's about something much deeper and much more urgent than that. It's about seeing what is invisible in your own life. It's about realizing that the greatest enemy of your prosperity may be hiding in exactly what you call comfort, convenience, and well-deserved reward. And those who see it change. Not overnight, but they truly change. Have you ever stopped to think about what you consider normal in your day-to-day life? Not in a philosophical way, not in an abstract way, but in a concrete, practical, financial way. The coffee you buy every morning on the way to work, the streaming subscription you barely use but keep paying for because it's too cheap to bother canceling, the delivery app that became a routine because cooking feels like too much after a long day, the new outfit you bought not because you needed it, but because it was on sale and seemed like an opportunity, the more complete phone plan because the basic one seemed insufficient for someone in your position. Each one of these things, looked at individually, seems absolutely reasonable. It even seems like a sign of a good life, of someone who worked hard and deserves a few conveniences. But when you add it all up, when you stop and look at the whole picture, what appears is something that most people avoid seeing, because it is too uncomfortable. A lifestyle carefully constructed to consume your income at the same speed, sometimes even faster, than it grows. And the scariest part is not that this happens. The scariest part is that it seems completely normal, because everyone around you is doing exactly the same thing. When everyone is trapped in the same pattern, nobody notices it's a trap. It feels like a choice. It feels like freedom. It feels like simply the way modern life works. And that is exactly the illusion I want to dismantle here with you today, calmly, respectfully, and with the honesty this subject deserves. Let's start from the beginning, which is understanding why certain things become normal even when they are not necessarily good for us. Human beings have a deep tendency toward normalization. We have an extraordinary capacity to adapt to situations, to transform the extraordinary into the ordinary, to accept as standard whatever we find repeated around us with enough frequency. This was extremely useful throughout our evolution because it allowed us to adapt to new and challenging environments without having an emotional breakdown with every change. But that same mechanism, in the modern world, has a very dark side that is highly relevant to finances. When a particular consumption pattern becomes common in your social group, when most of the people around you do certain things, subscribe to certain services, have certain spending habits, your brain registers that as the norm. And what is the norm is not questioned. What is the norm is simply reproduced. You don't stop to ask whether it makes sense. You don't analyze the cost versus the benefit. You don't compare it with alternatives. You simply do it because it's what is done, because it's what everyone does, because questioning it would be like questioning whether you should breathe. And here's the first point I want you to lock in firmly. The fact that something is common does not mean it is good for you. The fact that everyone does it does not mean it is the right decision. The fact that it seems normal does not mean it isn't costing you dearly. Because there are habits that are both common and devastating at the same time, and modern life is full of them. Think about this with me. When was the last time you truly questioned a fixed expense in your life? Not in the sense of complaining that it's expensive, but in the sense of sitting down, looking at that item on your expense list, and sincerely asking, is this adding real value to my life in proportion to what it is costing me? Does this service I've been subscribing to for 2 years still make sense for where I am today? Does this habit I developed represent a conscious choice or just an inertia I never stopped to review? Most people don't do this exercise, not because they are lazy or irresponsible, but because life is busy. Because this kind of reflection requires a pause that the modern pace does not encourage, and because there is a certain discomfort in looking at your own habits with critical eyes. It is much more comfortable to assume that everything is fine than to discover that you have been the main agent of your own financial stagnation without even realizing it. But let's talk about some of these habits that modernity has normalized and that carry a much higher cost than they appear to at first glance. And I'm not talking about outrageous amounts. I'm not talking about obvious extravagances. I'm talking about things that are part of the daily life of millions of middle-class people, people who work hard, who consider themselves responsible, who pay their bills on time, and who still can never truly move forward financially. Let's start with something that may seem small, but that when you actually stop to calculate, it has an enormous impact. The cost of convenience. We live in an era in which convenience has been transformed into a product. Someone makes your coffee, delivers your food, does your laundry, shops for your groceries, drives your car. For every task you use to do yourself, there is now a service available that promises to do it for you faster, easier, and more conveniently. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. The issue is not about demonizing convenience. The issue is about understanding what you are trading away when you choose convenience systematically in every area, without doing the math on what that represents across the whole of your financial life. Do you know how much you spend per month on convenience? Not on essential items, not on things you need, but specifically on services that exist to make your life easier and that you could perfectly well replace with a little more effort? Do that calculation honestly. Add up the coffee bought outside every day. Add up the delivery orders for the week. Add up the subscriptions to time-saving services. Add up the rideshare apps used for trips you could make another way. Add up the grocery delivery with the delivery fee you pay without thinking. For many people, that number reaches figures that are surprising when seen for the first time, because they were never put together, never seen as a category, always perceived as individual and small expenses that don't justify concern. And here is the trap of convenience. It is designed not to seem expensive. Each individual item carries a price that your mind classifies as low, as acceptable, as insignificant. It's just a few dollars for the coffee. It's just a few dollars for the delivery. It's just $10 or $15 a month for the subscription. The problem is that modernity offers you dozens of items in this category of just a few dollars. And when you add the whole thing up, you discover that you are spending a significant slice of your income on things you never used to have, that your parents' generation did not have, and that you have incorporated into your life as if they were basic necessities. When in reality, they are luxuries so normalized that they have lost the appearance of being luxuries at all. And it doesn't stop there. There is a phenomenon that behavioral economists have been describing for decades, but that is rarely discussed in a practical way for the general public. What is called lifestyle inflation. It works like this. You get a salary raise or some extra income or land a promotion, and instead of directing that difference toward investments or building a financial reserve, you expand your standard of living by the same proportion. You move into a bigger apartment. You upgrade your car. You start dining at more upscale restaurants. You subscribe to more complete services. You buy clothes from better brands. And each one of those decisions seems absolutely legitimate because you are earning more, so it makes sense to live better. But what is actually happening is that the gap between what you earn and what you spend stays the same, or sometimes even shrinks, and you don't truly accumulate anything. The wheel keeps spinning in the same place, just now with more speed and more sophistication. Let me ask you something. In the last 3 years, if you received any raise or improvement in income, how much of that was directed toward investments or savings, and how much was automatically absorbed by an expansion in your consumption pattern? You don't need to answer publicly, but be honest with yourself. Because that answer tells you everything about where you will be financially in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Lifestyle inflation is silent and seductive because it disguises itself as deserving. You worked hard. You grew in your career. It makes complete sense that your life should reflect that externally, right? And up to a certain point, yes. The problem begins when deserving becomes the automatic criterion for any expense above what you previously had, without passing through any filter of priority, without being compared to the opportunity cost of what that money could build if directed differently. Now I want to ask you a question that may be a little uncomfortable, but that is absolutely necessary for this conversation. Do you know the real difference between what you need and what you want? Not in an abstract way, not in a philosophical way, but in a practical way, applied to your monthly expense list. Because there is an enormous gray zone between necessity and desire that modern advertising is extraordinarily skilled at exploiting. That gray zone is the territory where so-called aspirational spending lives, the kind you do not make because you functionally need something, but because that acquisition represents an identity you want to have, a status you want to communicate, a version of yourself you want to project to the world. The newer car is not necessary to transport you. The apartment in a more upscale neighborhood is not necessary to shelter you. The designer clothing is not necessary to dress you. But all of them communicate something. All of them position you in a certain way within the social group in which you want to be seen. And that carries real emotional value. It is not something trivial or superficial. The problem is not wanting these things. The problem is when you acquire them at a financial cost that compromises your future security, that prevents the formation of real wealth, that keeps you eternally in the cycle of working to pay for an image while real prosperity never accumulates. Let's talk about social pressure, which is one of the most important and least discussed topics when it comes to personal finance. We are social animals, and that is not a metaphor, it is biology. The need for belonging, for group approval, for not being perceived as inferior or as different, that need is as primitive and as powerful as the need to eat and sleep. And in a world where status is largely communicated through consumption, where what you own is a signal of who you are, where social media has created a permanent and global showcase for everyone's life, that social pressure toward consumption has never been more intense, more constant, or more difficult to resist. Think about this with me. Have you ever felt that specific sensation of comparing yourself to someone you follow on social media? That pang when you see the trip someone took, the car someone bought, the party someone threw, the renovation someone did in their home? Even knowing rationally that you don't know that person's real financial situation, even knowing that what is shown on social media is a curated selection of the best moments and not the complete reality, the comparison happens almost automatically and generates a discomfort that your brain will try to resolve. And one of the most common and immediate ways of resolving that discomfort is through consumption. Buying something that puts you back at the perceived level. Doing something that is postable, that is shareable, that communicates that you are also doing well, that you are also progressing, that you also have a life worth showing. That phenomenon has a name in social psychology. It is social comparison theory, and it explains an enormous number of financial decisions that people make without realizing they are being driven by it. But let me go a little deeper on this, because social pressure in finances doesn't only come from social media, it also comes from your physical circle. It comes from the friends you have, the coworkers you spend time with, the family you gather with. Think about the last time your group of friends went out to dinner. Was the restaurant chosen because it offered the best value for everyone, or was it chosen because that was the kind of place the group frequents, that communicated a certain standard, and going somewhere simpler would have created an implicit discomfort? Think about the last family gathering. Did someone ask about your car, about where you're living, about your vacation? And did you feel that subtle pressure to present a version of your life that measured up to what the group expects of you? These moments exist for everyone, and how much they influence your financial decisions is far greater than you probably recognize. Because social pressure does not work through coercion, it does not work through direct threat. It works in a much more elegant and much more effective way. It operates through the internal discomfort you feel when you sense that you might be falling behind, when you feel your life is not measuring up to the group's expectations, when you fear the silent judgment of others about your choices. And that discomfort is so unpleasant that you do everything to avoid it, even if that means compromising your long-term financial health in the name of short-term social comfort. Now I need to ask you something important. How much of your monthly budget is being influenced by social needs and not by real needs? It's not an easy question to answer, I know, but it is worth sitting with it for a while. It is worth looking at each expense from last month and asking, was this for me or was this for the perception others have of me? Because when you start making that distinction, when you start separating what you consume to live from what you consume to appear, the possibilities for redirecting resources become much clearer. Let's move now to another aspect of the modern lifestyle that is rarely questioned, but that has an enormous financial impact: the subscription economy. We live in an era in which almost everything can be subscribed to. Music, movies, series, games, software, gyms, monthly curated product boxes, digital magazines, productivity tools, cloud storage services, course platforms, meditation apps, recipe apps, fitness apps. The list is endless and grows every month with new subscription-based business models. And each one of those subscriptions is priced specifically to stay below the pain threshold, to cost little enough that canceling doesn't seem worth the effort, but using it consistently isn't guaranteed either. Do you know exactly how many active subscriptions you currently have? Not the approximate number, the exact number. And how many of them did you use consistently in the last month? Most people, when they do this exercise honestly, discover that between 30 and 50% of their subscriptions are being paid for services they rarely or never use. And here is the business model behind all of this, which is absolutely brilliant from an entrepreneurial standpoint, but devastating from a consumer standpoint. The company knows you won't cancel even without using it because the monthly amount is low enough not to justify the friction of canceling. You will keep paying month after month, year after year, for something you don't use, because it is easier to keep it than to cancel it. This is behavioral design applied to maximize customer retention regardless of actual usage. And it works. It works on a massive scale. And it works especially well with people who, because they have a busy life full of responsibilities, rarely stop to audit their own fixed expenses. Can you picture yourself sitting down tonight and reviewing all your active subscriptions, canceling the ones that no longer make sense, renegotiating the ones that do but could cost less? It seems simple, and it is simple, but most people don't do it because it seems too small to justify the effort. Except small repeated every month for years is not small. It is a significant amount that could be building wealth instead of sustaining services you don't use. I want to talk now about something that enters deeper territory, which is the relationship between emotion and consumption in the context of the modern lifestyle. We have already touched on the topic of emotional spending before, but here I want to address a specific angle that has everything to do with the pace of contemporary life. We live in an era of chronic stress. Work never truly stops because your phone is always with you. Professional demands blend with personal ones without clear boundaries. The pace of information is overwhelming. The obligations are many. Time seems to shrink even when the schedule is technically full of conveniences that should have created more free time. In this context of chronic exhaustion, consumption becomes one of the main escape valves available. And that is not by accident. The entire system was structured to work exactly this way. When you are depleted, when you are stressed, when you are overloaded, your capacity for rational decision-making drops significantly. Your tolerance for discomfort decreases. Your willingness to delay gratification practically disappears. And it is exactly in that state that you are most vulnerable to sales strategies, most prone to impulsive consumption, most easily persuaded that that purchase is deserved, necessary, urgent. Have you ever gone to the mall on a Saturday after an exhausting week of work? What happened? You probably left with things you hadn't planned to buy, spent more than you intended, and came home with that mixture of temporary satisfaction and lasting guilt that characterizes emotional spending. That is not a weakness of character. That is human psychology, functioning exactly as the consumption system exploited it to function. But understanding this mechanism is powerful, because you begin to be able to work with it instead of being continuously swept away by it. A question I want you to ask yourself: in what emotional states do you spend the most? When you are anxious? When you are bored? When you are celebrating? When you are sad? When you are tired? Mapping those emotional triggers is one of the most powerful exercises that exists for gaining awareness about your consumption patterns. Because when you know which emotion activates the impulse to spend, you can start developing other responses to that emotion that don't involve the credit card. Let's talk about something that is fundamental to understand for any discussion about lifestyle and finances: opportunity cost. This is a simple economic concept, but one that most people have never applied to their own life in a concrete way. Opportunity cost is what you give up when you choose one thing over another. When you spend $100 today on something unnecessary, the real cost of that expense is not just $100. It is everything those $100 would have become if they had been invested. With compound interest over 10, 20, 30 years, those $100 spent on something you didn't need could have grown into considerably larger amounts, depending on the rate of return and the time period. But because that future value is abstract and the pleasure of spending now is concrete, opportunity cost rarely enters the calculation at the moment of the decision. And it is exactly that asymmetry between the immediate and the future that the consumption system exploits with mastery. Every sales strategy is designed to make present pleasure as vivid and immediate as possible, while keeping the real future cost as invisible as possible. The monthly payment that fits the budget, the cashback that seems like an advantage, the sale that seems like an opportunity, the pre-approved credit that seems like convenience. All of these mechanisms serve to bring the pleasure closer and push the real cost further from conscious perception at the moment of decision. Let me give you a concrete example to make this clearer. Imagine you have the habit of buying a specialty coffee outside every weekday, costing an average of $7 per day. That seems absolutely normal, absolutely reasonable for someone who works, who has a demanding routine, who deserves that small daily pleasure. But let's do the math. $7 a day, 5 days a week, is $35 a week. In a month, that's $140. In a year, that is $1,680. Over 10 years, without factoring in any investment return, that is $16,800. And if that $140 a month had been invested at a reasonable rate of return over 10 years, the accumulated value would be considerably higher. And now, multiply that exercise by all the other convenience and comfort habits you have, and a number begins to emerge that most people have never calculated because they never looked at the whole picture. I am not saying you should eliminate all pleasure and all comfort from your life in the name of Spartan austerity. That would be both impractical and miserable. I am saying that awareness of the real opportunity cost of your habits can help you make more intentional choices to prioritize the pleasures that truly matter to you and eliminate the ones you maintain only out of inertia or social pressure. Because when you know what you are trading away, the decision looks different. Not necessarily easier, but much more conscious. I want to talk now about the role of technology in this equation, because it is an element that has profoundly transformed the consumption landscape over the last 2 decades. Technology has made consumption absurdly easy. So easy that the friction that previously existed naturally between desire and purchase, that friction that gave time for the impulse to pass, that required some planning, that created a natural pause between wanting and having, that friction has been almost completely eliminated. You see something you want on social media. 1 tap to go to the store, 2 taps to add to the cart, 1 tap to confirm with your biometrics. The product is on its way. All of that in less than 30 seconds, without leaving the couch, without needing to speak to anyone, without a single moment of reflection forced by the process. And the algorithms behind all of this are not neutral. They are constantly learning what attracts you, what holds your attention, what increases the probability of you spending. Every click you make, every product you look at but don't buy, every search you perform, every amount of time you spend on a certain type of content, all of that feeds a system that becomes progressively better at presenting you with exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment to maximize the probability of converting to a purchase. Have you ever noticed how after searching for a product online, it starts appearing everywhere? In social media ads, in search results, in the emails you receive. That is not a coincidence, and it is not luck. It is a sophisticated retargeting system working to keep that potential purchase alive in your mind until your resistance gives way. And the resistance gives way. Statistically, most people eventually give in because repetition normalizes the desire, because the constant reminder keeps the item present in consciousness, and because at some point the emotional state will be in a place where the resistance is weaker and the impulse wins. In this context, the question that needs to be asked is not whether you will be influenced by technology, because you will be, we all are. The question is, will you be influenced unconsciously and reactively, or will you develop enough awareness about these mechanisms to make choices that are truly yours and not simply responses to the stimuli the system specifically designed to move you toward spending? Because there is an enormous difference between using technology and being used by it. Between being a conscious consumer in the digital environment and being a target that the digital environment exploits with increasing efficiency. And developing that awareness, that capacity for pause, that ability to identify when you are being moved by commercial design rather than genuine need, that is one of the most valuable financial skills you can build in the contemporary world. Let me now touch on a point that is very important and that is rarely addressed with the frankness it deserves: the question of consumption identity. We become what we buy. Not literally, of course, but socially, symbolically, in the perception of ourselves and of others. What you wear, what you drive, where you live, where you vacation, where you dine, where your children go to school, all of that functions as social language, as signals that communicate who you are, which group you belong to, what position you occupy. And in a society where consumption is the primary dialect of status, where people read you through what you own, there is enormous pressure for your consumption identity to be compatible with the social identity you want to have or maintain. The problem is that this consumption identity has a cost, and often that cost is inversely proportional to the real wealth of the person paying it. This means that some of the people who spend the most to appear prosperous are exactly those who are building the least real prosperity. Because real wealth is not what you show, it is what you quietly accumulate while you are not trying to impress anyone. There is a very famous study in the United States that followed the consumption habits of first-generation millionaires, those who built significant wealth starting from zero, and the result surprised many people. The majority of those individuals lived significantly more modestly than their income would have allowed. They drove simple cars, lived in modest homes compared to their net worth, did not flaunt what they had, and directed the difference between what they earned and what they could have spent toward investments and wealth building. Meanwhile, many people with much lower incomes spent far more on status symbols, lived very close to or above the limit of their budget, and accumulated little or nothing despite earning well. The distinction is not just about numbers, it is about mindset. It is about what you are trying to build with your money and for whom. Are you building wealth and freedom, or are you building an image and an appearance? And here I need to ask you directly, if you were honest about your current financial situation, about what you have truly accumulated versus what you appear to have, what would the difference be? Because many people live with an enormous dissonance between what they show and what they actually have, and maintaining that dissonance carries a financial and emotional cost that accumulates over time. Now, I want to talk about something I consider one of the most underestimated aspects of this entire discussion, which is the cumulative impact of small decisions over time. There is a human tendency to underestimate the power of time over our financial choices. We tend to think of the present as disconnected from the future, to treat today's decisions as if they carry no consequences 10, 20, 30 years from now. But time is the most powerful ingredient in any financial equation, both for better and for worse. For better, because compound interest transforms modest and consistent contributions into significant wealth over decades. For worse, because consumption patterns established today, if maintained without review, create a trajectory that becomes progressively harder to alter as time passes. The habit that costs little at 30 but was never questioned will cost proportionally more at 40, will represent a harder choice to give up at 50, and will have cost a fortune in opportunity cost across that entire trajectory. I want you to imagine two versions of yourself 15 years from now. The first version continued exactly as things are, with the same consumption patterns, the same subscriptions, the same convenience habits, the same social pressure determining choices, the same lifestyle inflation absorbing every income increase. Where will that version of you be financially in 15 years? The second version started today making small changes, not drastic ones, not ones requiring suffering or deprivation, but conscious and consistent changes, reviewed the subscriptions, reduced some convenience habits, started questioning aspirational spending, began directing the difference toward investments, developed a more conscious relationship with consumption. Where will that version of you be in 15 years? This visualization exercise is not about being pessimistic about the present. It is about connecting the present to the future in a way that our brains naturally avoid doing, because the future is abstract and the present is concrete. But when you make that future more vivid, more real, more present in your imagination, today's decisions carry a different weight, a different meaning. Each choice begins to be evaluated not only for the immediate pleasure it offers, but for what it represents in the larger trajectory of your financial life. Let's move now to an aspect that is very practical and that can generate real change in your life relatively quickly if you have the willingness to apply it. The lifestyle audit. It is not a sophisticated concept. It is basically sitting down and looking honestly at everything you spend, categorizing it clearly, identifying what is a real necessity, what is an acquired habit, what is social pressure, what is emotional impulse, what is pure inertia, and then making intentional decisions about each category. It seems simple, and it is. But most people have never done this exercise in depth because it is uncomfortable, because it forces you to look at reality without the filters we normally use to feel okay about our choices, and because the results can be disturbing enough to demand changes that, even when small, require some effort. But I guarantee you, people who do this exercise honestly almost always find opportunities to redirect resources that they had never seen before because they were looking at expenses one by one, never at the whole picture. And when you see the whole picture, when you add it all up and see the complete pattern, the clarity that emerges is far more powerful than any isolated piece of financial advice. Could you do this week? It doesn't need to be a perfect analysis. It doesn't need to follow a specific format. It just needs to be honest. What are all your expenses? What is the nature of each one? Which ones do you defend because they are genuinely important? And which ones do you maintain because you never question them? That clarity, even if it is uncomfortable at first, is the starting point of any real financial transformation. Because you cannot change what you cannot see. And the modern lifestyle was designed so that you don't see it, so that each expense appears isolated and small enough not to deserve questioning, so that the whole picture never becomes clearly visible in your consciousness. I also want to talk about something that has everything to do with lifestyle, and that is frequently overlooked in conversations about personal finance: the emotional cost of living beyond your means. There is a very common narrative that spending well, having a comfortable and modern lifestyle, is synonymous with quality of life. And up to a certain point, it is true that certain things add real value to the experience of living. But there is a threshold, a point beyond which more consumption does not equate to more happiness, more satisfaction, more peace. And many people are significantly beyond that threshold, spending more than they should on things that don't proportionally increase their well-being, while carrying the emotional weight that comes with debt, with the absence of savings, with financial vulnerability, with the stress of knowing that any unexpected event can destabilize everything. That emotional weight is real and carries a cost that goes far beyond the financial. It affects sleep, it affects relationships, it affects health, it affects the ability to be present and to enjoy the things that truly matter. And the paradox is that many people consume precisely to relieve that stress in a cycle that progressively deepens. You spend to feel better, but the spending worsens the financial situation, which increases the stress, which increases the need to spend to feel better. Do you recognize that pattern? Because it is far more common than people admit, and recognizing it is the first step toward getting out of it. Now I need to touch on something that is fundamental and that runs counter to a very widespread idea about personal finance. There is a very common belief that the path to financial health is simply to earn more money, that if the income increased enough, all problems would be solved, all debts would be paid, the emergency fund would be built, life would become easier. But the data, and more importantly, the real stories of thousands of people, show something different. They show that an increase in income without a change in mindset and behavior almost always results only in an expansion of the consumption standard, not in an accumulation of wealth. They show that people who earn 3 or 4 times more than you but have the same financial behavior. Patterns frequently have the same financial fragility, sometimes even greater, because the lifestyle they sustain has also grown proportionally. The problem is not the income. The problem is the relationship with money. The problem is the set of beliefs, habits, and behaviors that were built throughout a lifetime and that now determine what you do with every dollar that comes in, regardless of how much comes in. And changing that does not necessarily require earning more. It requires seeing differently. It requires questioning what seems normal. It requires having the courage to make choices that go against the current of standardized consumption around you. It requires developing a relationship with money that is based on values and objectives that are genuinely yours, not the values and objectives that the consumption system defined for you through decades of advertising, social pressure, and habit normalization. We are getting close to the end of this conversation, and I want to leave you with some reflections that I hope will stay alive in your mind after this video ends. The first reflection is about normality. Question what you call normal. Not everything, not in a paranoid way, but with the genuine willingness to ask whether what you are doing is a conscious choice or simply the automatic reproduction of what everyone around you does. Because the group's normal may be exactly the pattern that is preventing you from getting where you want to be. The second reflection is about visibility. Make visible what is invisible. Add up the expenses that seem small. Calculate the annual cost of daily habits. Review the subscriptions. Look at the whole picture. Because fragmentation is what allows harmful patterns to persist without being questioned. When you see the complete picture, the choices become much clearer. The third reflection is about identity. Who you are must be bigger than what you own. Your value as a person, the richness of your life, the quality of your relationships, the depth of your experiences, these things are not available for purchase and do not improve with a car upgrade or an apartment renovation. When you truly internalize that, the pressure to consume for the sake of status loses a great deal of its power over you. The fourth reflection is about time. Every day that passes with the current patterns is not a neutral day. It is a day of lost opportunity to build something different. I'm not saying this to generate anxiety or guilt. I'm saying it to awaken in you the sense that the moment to start doing things differently is now, with what you have, where you are. Not after things improve, not after paying off a certain debt, not next month, not next year. Now. With small, consistent changes that over time produce results that the grand changes promised for later rarely deliver. And the fifth and final reflection is about freedom, or real financial freedom is not about having a lot of money. It is about having options. It is about not being trapped in a job out of desperate necessity because you have no savings. It is about being able to choose how you use your time without the lack of money being the determining factor. It is about having the security of knowing that an unexpected event will not destabilize everything you have built. That freedom does not begin with a higher salary. It begins with a decision to look at what is being called normal in your life with honest eyes, to question what no longer makes sense, to begin aligning your spending with your real values and not with the expectations of the group around you. That decision you can make today. You don't need more income for that. You don't need anyone's approval for that. You only need clarity, honesty, and the willingness to do things differently even when everyone around you continues doing things the same old way. Because in the end, the question that matters is not what is normal for your group. The question that matters is, what is right for your life, for your goals, for the person you want to become, and for the freedom you want to have. And only you can answer that. Start answering it today. I'll see you in the next video. Take very good care of yourself.